For more on China's relations with Saudi Arabia, I'm joined by Mohammed Al-Sudairi, live from Hong Kong. He's a research fellow at the King Faisal Center. Now, Mohammed, China and Saudi Arabia signed more than a dozen agreements on economic cooperation worth about $65 billion, according to Beijing's foreign ministry. What are the key areas of cooperation between these two countries?
Okay, well, there are many different areas of cooperation between the two countries. Most prominently, energy, of course, is one. Saudi Arabia has traditionally been China's top supplier for oil, at least from 2000 up to 2015. Of course, overtaken by Russia last year. But generally speaking, its share of the Chinese market in that area is quite large. And so one area that they have been continuing to explore is to enhance Saudi Arabia's energy security, namely in the area of expanding cooperation and refining, processing and refining infrastructure in places like Yunnan, Fujian, Shandong, and one new refinery that has been added into Liaoning has been considered. Other sectors are, of course, also investments. So both countries now are trying to streamline investment processes to ensure that more outbound Chinese investments head into Saudi Arabia. And also beyond that, traditional areas that have also been identified in the Arab White Paper from last year have also reemerged within the context of these MOUs. For instance, aerospace, alternative energy sources, including nuclear power, and also other new technologies such as drone manufacturing, which Saudi Arabia has indicated a considerable interest in,
right.
As well as telecommunications, where Huawei has a very large presence in. Yes.
Now, as you mentioned, oil is usually what people think of when they think of Saudi Arabia, but we know that they're trying to diversify beyond oil, and especially working with China. How do you think some of the areas of cooperation could open up, especially with China and the One Belt, One Road initiative?
Okay, for Saudi Arabia principally, it's facing a number of challenges, which is why it has pushed for the 2030 vision, namely to transform the Saudi economy from a petroleum-based, frontier-based economy into one where the non-oil sectors are far more dynamic and far more productive and would constitute the major sources of income. Now, with regards to energy specifically, Saudi Arabia cannot totally detach from that area, and it still requires the liquidity coming from the petroleum sector to fuel its structural reforms. And that's where China plays an extremely important role, insofar as it's one of the remaining dynamic markets on the global arena, and it's one of the areas where projected growth and demand for oil will continue on for the next 20 years. And Saudi Arabia wants to make sure that its share of that market is maintained in order to sort of sustain the liquidity source to fuel its own economic reform projects. In the context of the One Belt, One Road, Saudi Arabia wants to see, at least in the eyes of Saudi policymakers, the emergence of a synergy between the 2030 vision as well as the One Belt, One Road, especially since the 2030 vision hopes to effect the transformation of Saudi Arabia into a major hub, a technological hub, an import-export hub, an infrastructural hub. And this would necessarily mean that it wants to link up with the logistical infrastructural projects that are being undertaken through the One Belt, One Road. And you can see this, rhetorically being emphasized by Saudi ministers,
right,
and many other different prominent officials, in the sense that they seek to position Saudi Arabia as the gateway to the Middle Eastern and African markets for China.
Now, speaking of that positioning, what is Saudi Arabia doing to win back China's market share after it was overtaken by Russia? Okay,
well, as I reiterated and said, Saudi Arabia has been the top supplier for China over the last 15 years, and it was only really overtaken last year. And even then, really, if you look at the aggregate barrels of oil that have been exported by both countries, they're roughly at the same level. Saudi Arabia, will continue on with a very classical policy or approach of ensuring its energy security in China, which is, to continue cooperating on, developing refineries in the country, which has already been indicated through a number of MOUs signed, and also to continue to cooperate with China with regards to the development of its strategic oil reserves. Now, the issue as to why Russia has overtaken Saudi Arabia, albeit slightly, is driven by multiple factors. First of all, you have a global supply gut in terms of energy. Russia itself is facing sanctions from the West, and it's offering concessionary energy prices to China. And also, other factors come into play, which is, the Chinese state wants to continue and maintain diversified sources of energy for its imports. It doesn't want to rely on one particular supplier, which makes it's a very reasonable approach, generally speaking. And there are also other circumstantial variables that will probably continue to ensure that Russia will still enjoy a slight sort of supplier's advantage vis-a-vis China, namely, for example, the expansion that is expected to be completed at the end of this year of the Siberian pipeline between Russia and China. And also, just the fact that you have a lot of independent refineries in China that are sort of outside of the parceled sales that are usually arranged between Aramco and the main sort of state-owned oil enterprises in China. A lot of the independent ones are buying oil from Russia, and that's what's fueling this sort of spike in Russian exports to China.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Certainly a lot of factors
and I should also add one more thing, which is, of course...
I'm sorry, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there.
Just one more thing I should add, which is very important. Okay.
Our thanks to Mohammed Al-Sudairi from the King Faisal Research Center.